So I guess the first place to start, honestly, Pablo, would be tell me how you got to JWB. I've heard a little bit of the story in terms of how you connected with Greg and a podcast piece, which I think would be really interesting to unpack here too. But as we think about your bio, give me kind of the long version. How'd you get where you are today?
Yeah, man. So I've always been obsessed with making friends with people, right? Like it's like my number one thing, right? Like at the very core, like moving around 3 different continents when I was a kid shaped me in the sense of like always feeling like an outsider insider, which makes me obsessed with human connection. Early 30s, I realized that it wasn't about me being the coolest guy in the room. It was about me understanding what makes you cool and making you feel cool. And then that makes me the best guy in the room, right? So like selfish. But that was through getting involved in all these like nonprofits and like building these like young professional groups for charities. And then eventually being able to pivot based on like these young professional groups that I had built, I was able to like tie that into the value that I had as a professional in my career, which was at that point, I had started a green building consulting company, went in-house for my biggest client as director of sustainability, was like at this like dead end, working for this like hospital developer. And I started leveraging the audiences that I had made with the young professionals of Miami, with the network that I had built, being on the boards of nonprofits, to have events, to then like host a developer about like something that their development is actually addressing, along with like a politician that cares about that issue, to, and then becoming a business developer that way, right? So like sure. At a certain point, I had this like thesis of like value added business development through this type of like stuff, led me to Jacksonville, where I joined this like startup, kind of like implemented a different version of it because I jumped into a dumpster fire unbeknownst to me, and started hosting like Zoom events in early 2018, doing this stuff, right? Sure. And that became the aha moment. End of 2018, decided to just start by myself because I didn't really want to be partners with this guy based on his learnings, with the idea being that I took like a 90-day purposeful pause to like kind of like figure out where I want to be in 10 years instead of just take the next opportunity that comes my way, because I fall in love with everybody all the time and I want to say yes. And I booked like 4 conferences during that time. I came back with like a Excel sheet of like a new 450 people that I had met that now like became part of my network, that were like 450 iterations of just like, yeah, I'm thinking about this, what about that, blah, 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 evolved into like, I want to show that community creation is the future of business development, right? So like that's first 3 months of 2019. So I start trying to sell that shit. Nobody's buying community on day one on Monday morning, right? So it was like, but I found, have you ever heard of Brendan Kane?
Name sounds familiar, but I'm not super familiar with his work.
Yeah. So anyways, this guy, somebody introduced, at the time I was like, I want to speak about like networking and relationship building and community, but like obviously nobody hires a speaker that hasn't really accomplished anything. So like somebody puts me in contact with this guy. He's a best-selling author and like the like social media consultant of the stars. And he is like, I'm trying to get advice on how to speak. At the end of the day, he's like, bro, you got to do something extraordinary. I was like, cool, how can I help you? He becomes my first client because he's trying to figure out how to like solve for like a back end. He's working with celebrities, so getting these big contracts, but he's like super expensive. He wants to help more people and create more recurring revenue. So I pitch him on this idea of like a community on the back end of a free book plus shipping funnel in the similar way that I had done in this other place. He's into it. We get going. And as I'm doing this with him, he's like a world's foremost content strategist. And I realized this isn't just a community play, it's a content play. And right around the time that I'm working with him, I meet Greg, who they're hosting like a golf volleyball tournament, like a culture day. And somebody invites me, like his like insurance provider, who's like their in-house insurance person that has her own business, who's one of my best friends, invites me to be on her team. I knew Greg's partner, Alex, because I had invested in their private lending program like 2014. And they were like really close friends with Whitney Ritchie and Rich Ritchie, who were like 2 of my best friends up here in Jacksonville. So I'm talking to Alex. Alex is like, I'm telling him what I'm doing. He's like, oh man, Greg's trying to figure out how to like put out content. You should talk to him. So I talked to Greg. He's like, yeah, I'm going to do my own thing right now. It's cool. And then I meet up with him again in November at their golf tournament when Whitney asked me to like go be the hype man of her like golf tournament tent. And at that point, he's like, bro, I'm getting kicked in the teeth with this like content stuff. I'm ready to listen. And that's when we like went to like a happy hour. And I'm like, dude, the key for you to create content is just to not carry the burden yourself. If you start highlighting your clients and you do this in this like live interactive fashion, that then turns into a podcast and a YouTube channel and like social media bits and all these different things. And we do it this way, we can also drive a community that ends up becoming this big like referral mechanism, because the people in your ecosystem all want to get to know each other, right? So like he takes a flyer on that. we launched this, not your average investor show thing, that, like started January 2020. By like December, by December 2020, we're having this like fan appreciation show. And it's like back to back to back to back, people hopping on and being like, oh my God, this is so valuable to me. I feel like I'm a part of a community. And this is why I do business with JWB. And it becomes like their biggest quarter ever. January 2021 becomes their biggest quarter ever, right? Like there is some tailwinds and like there's a moment in the economy where all this stuff is working, but it all just like came together. And during this time, like when COVID hits, I'm like, fuck, this guy is, this is like my stage to prove my thesis. So when COVID hits, I'm like, dude, I still need to spend time with you. Like, let's go running on Tuesdays. Like, do you run in the mornings? Let's go running in the mornings. That's socially distant, whatever. So we're doing that. And like within that, I get to spend a really, really quality time where we like, he's like my best friend now, right? Like, and I'm learning about everything and I'm just getting like really, really intimately involved. And the whole time I'm like poking around, like, how can I pick up one of these fucking rental properties, like, and eventually it all clicks for me as this like journey happens of like, first we're profiling their clients and like interesting things and people in their network. Eventually we're like, also, we need to add more education into the back end of this. That gets me educated. And I'm like, okay, this really makes sense to me. I pull the trigger with like the savings that I had at the time. I also kind of like February 2020, bought a bunch of Peloton stock. That did awesome for that year. So
great.
In March 2021, I sold that and bought another property. So like and now I'm like thinking about cashing out some of my 401k and buying another property, right? Like I'm like scrapping things together to become more and more of a real estate investor. Throughout this journey, I get to play the noble fool beside him as we're like, he's the expert and I'm the guy that's asking hey man, I know I might sound stupid for asking this, but like, I think this is what people are thinking about because I really am the client. Right. So yeah, so it's all mushroomed into this like amazing marketing activity. And now the community is, like the Facebook group's like 3,600, but like the really cool thing is that there's like meetups happening in like Los Altos, California, and Seattle and Denver this month, and then Pittsburgh. Like it's become a real thing where these like, there's probably about like 25 to 30 people that this has become their social circle. And that's, that's made it really, really scalable to the point where, like this Jen Filzen, who's like, who we call our fairy godmother of the community. She's like just carrying these like meetups around the country. Whenever she has like an event that she's doing for work, she'll have a meetup and like 10 people show up. And out of those 10 people, 2 of them have never heard of JWB. And like, one of them has already bought a property by now, like stuff like that. So it's like this like really community play for education and social validation and all the stuff that makes all our content flow. That's also become super, super profitable. Like we do a property of the week on Thursdays. Yeah. And like, it hasn't happened for a couple of weeks, but for like 4 or 5 Thursdays in a row, we were literally selling the property that we were highlighting on the show during the show, like QVC style. It's like a $200,000 property that somebody's never seen or visited. People are fucking buying it like during the show. Because we've just created this like machine of social validation and goodwill and entertainment and education and blah, 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 blah.
So first off, that's great context for us to have, Pablo. And I really appreciate the pieces. And like I said, I think it's gonna be really natural to segue in and out of kind of you and JWB and what the story has been intertwining. And
something I didn't mention in all that, me watching how JWB operates has profoundly informed my life and what I think about a business and how it should be built. Right. So like, I kind of see myself as like the official JWB historian because I've been in the guts of the machine and I'm just a fucking super fanboy about it. Right. Like, so I've got no problem just like really just gushing about what I think about Greg and his 3 partners and the stuff that they built and their team and their methodologies and all this other stuff as well.
That's incredible. And I saw you make that note in your intake form about, being a chronicler. And I think that's going to be a really compelling angle for us as we think about the things that you've seen as kind of an insider, but also an outsider, right? Like you sit in a really unique place within the community. So I think what I want to do before we jump too far into kind of the really nuts and bolts of the JWB piece and the real estate piece, I would love to clarify one thing. So was the investing that you did with JWB during 2020, was that your first real estate investing experience? Or did you say something in 2014 that you had also invested in too? Okay.
Yeah. So they do private lending and they do this turnkey rental income property investing. Private lending in like 2014, the Richies, right? The people that I've referenced a couple of times, Rich was like, dude, I have this thing where you can just put 25 grand in and you get 10% and it's a 2-year note. And whenever it cashes out, they just put it back in and you keep compounding. And I was like, well, shit, man, I got 25 grand. Like I did that. And then when it cashed out, it was like election time or something like that. And I was like, man, I'm going to see what the elections do and blah, blah, blah. It was fucking stupid. Like I should have just re-upped with them. And, part of my journey is informed by the fact that like, I should have understood what I was investing in better. And I would have done much better in it as opposed to just like had this one good experience. And now I'm like in their big product, which is the actually owning turnkey rental properties.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's super helpful because I think one of the things that we're going to want to do is be able to kind of establish your credibility, not necessarily as, hey, this is, Pablo's got a portfolio of this giant, like we don't need that piece, but what we do need is what's your experience been like with investing? So that's a great story to have of, hey, I jumped in, saw good returns, but didn't stay in necessarily in the way that you think you should have in hindsight. Can you say more about what your thought process was then in terms of, you mentioned kind of just general, maybe macro events that were occurring that you wanted to kind of think about, but what was that experience like?
Yeah, man. My thought process then was a couple of things. I was like, well, what if I want to buy a house in Miami? What if I want to what if I need this money short term?
Yeah.
As opposed to just like, it's better off to have this money working for me. And then once the actual short-term thing is go. I was very informed by the 2008 crisis of just like, well, I don't really know what real estate's going to do. I didn't really understand the mechanism. Like my dad still doesn't believe in this shit. Right. So like, it's only been in the last like year, after a year plus of working with JWB, that I'm really able to explain it to some of my like friends that have owned the rental income property in the past, just not in this way, are like hotshot, accredited investors that have access to syndications and whatnot, right? Like the ability to really differentiate between what this vehicle is versus other vehicles is really, really nuanced. And it also comes with a high degree of just like, yes, a lot of this stuff fails for other people. It's about finding the right people to do this with that have it figured out in a way that is intrinsically tied to your well-being as their incentive.
So say more about that. That sounds like a very human touch as it relates to something that might feel less human when it comes to, say, just kind of objectively real estate investing.
Yeah, well, so like the objective piece is leverage. Like I never really understood leverage. I never really understood the idea that like when you are investing in a rental property, when you're investing in something that you can take a loan out to invest in, you're going to put down 20% of its total value into the investment, but whatever it appreciates, you're going to get the appreciation from the entire investment, right? So I don't know if Greg's ever explained that part to you.
Sure, a little bit.
Okay, cool. So like that's the part that clicks in the rational brain. In the emotional brain, you don't often find like the intersection of all the things that are working in the, man, I trust these guys with everything is huge, right? Like obviously my relationship and having seen the guts of how well the company is built and being able to tell the story and understanding how they operate where they literally have a year's worth of operating expenses set aside to not have to lay people off and whatever. Like they did not hit the panic button at any moment during COVID, which was pretty rare because they are that financially responsible, right? And then the other part of it that it's like you get 4 37-year-old guys that could all be CEOs of a company that are completely committed to this like consensus-based decision-making framework and building through culture. The talent that creates, like the talent density that creates is huge. And they've now made it 14 years without breaking up the band, right? So it's not like it's going to get too hot and one of them is going to have a big head, on top of the fact that they sit inside what has been before this one of the hottest markets in the United States for real estate investing. That is like one out of very few, right? The Urban Land Institute has declared Jacksonville like a supernova city, which is something that they've only declared for other cities, as far as I know, right? I might be full of shit. But like this is stuff I've heard that they've only declared for other cities that have really just blown up with real estate, like Nashville and Charlotte.
Gotcha. Sure.
Right. And they happen to be at this age where they're like 36 to 38, all have like kids that are under 10 years old. have amassed enough wealth and influence to have aspirations to really affect the macro economy of the local economy, and the ability to be like, nah, I want to make this city cool enough so that when my kid graduates college, he wants to come back. You know, like they are all in that stage of life. Like they are all that committed to the city and actually have the ability to do it, which is nuts. Right? Like,
yeah, geez, Pablo, this is really exciting because these are the pieces that we don't get from Greg, because I think it's a little bit hard to do surgery on yourself, right? I mean, like it's, you know, it's, this framing of what you've seen is really powerful. So as a community builder yourself, what do you think has been the most impressive part of the community that you've seen form around JWB, and why do you think it's, you know, manifested in that way?
So back to my first two clients, right? My first two clients was like a celebrity that had helped other celebrities and very few people, but had a huge name and had done really significant stuff. My second client wasn't a big name, but she was a big part of like the artist community in Philadelphia. When we went to like build a community around these two folks, it was pulling teeth with the big name, and it was super easy with the person that actually helped people. Right? It made it obvious to me that like the only way that people gravitate towards you is because they know of someone that, you know, like beyond like at the regular person level, you can only get people to gravitate to you in an ask if you have helped a bunch of people, and a lot of people know of a person, you know, first person, 1 degree of separation that they've helped. When JWB threw up the flare of like, hey, we're starting a Facebook group, we had like 150 people opt in immediately. Wow. Right? Like that for other clients that I've tried to do this stuff with takes time, right? You can't do that with a startup. Like people just don't give a shit, right? Like these guys have for the last 14 years really been in the trenches, which with a total like focus on making the customer whole and making the experience right, no matter what happens, and like willing to take a haircut for themselves in order to preserve their reputation. Right. Like, and they started doing that right at the beginning of their company, which was like the first 2 years was the financial crisis, and they just ate a bunch of dicks in order to preserve their reputation for 14 years later for this moment.
So one of the things that strikes me too, Pablo, is that you've got a company in JWB that is physically located. It's literally, you know, it's a physical office. It's in a, you know, it's not remote. And yet the culture that you're talking about and the way that Greg and his co-founders like think about the organization strikes me as very much the way a lot of startups would want to think of themselves, you know, right? And so, but they
I
don't
say this all the time. Like they are a Silicon Valley SaaS company operating as a like local business.
Yeah.
They're a local
business
say more about that. Operating like a Silicon Valley SaaS company, right? Like they have a data flywheel. They have tech enabled everything that they can. They have figured out like full on lean methodology, redundancy around everything that they do. They, you know, you read Creativity Inc. and one of like the big things in like Pixar is that they, every like quarter, they shut down for like company idea day and who can come up with ideas. They do that shit, right? Like they do stuff that you only read about by reading about like Amazon and Pixar and Netflix and all these other unicorns. They operate at that level with that level of like operational proficiency and technology and data informed decisions. Just four dudes that are, you know, real estate investors that, you know, have built this thing organically.
Yeah, I think it's an antithesis to a lot of what we think about in both in real estate investing and also just in where the world is going from a business perspective. Yeah. So say a little bit more about what that does to the talent that kind of is, you know, aggregating around them.
Yeah, man. So one of the things that Greg asked me to do as he was evaluating me as a marketing partner was to come to their TMM, their Tuesday morning meeting, right? Like that is their all staff meeting that they have every week. I am a ferociously ADHD person, and you tell me that I got to sit through a 1 hour meeting, I'd rather get kicked in the face, right? So, but I show up to this because I'm trying to get this client, and immediately I'm blown away by the fact that there's 85 people in a room for an hour, completely engaged with what is happening, right? And they started off with core values call outs where somebody can get up and based on having somebody else observe the living of the core values of the companies, people are incentivized to recognize it and then get up and public speak and give somebody a compliment to kind of like reward that person. And you're also, as the person that gets up and done it, you're also seen by the rest of the team, right? Like, just like genius stuff, right? Like genius stuff of like social dynamics. As I'm like looking around the room, I'm realizing this thing's like a casebook study out of an MBA program. Like it's like 50% female, 50% male, like 15% visible minorities. Leadership positions are all like distributed evenly. Like it's, I often talk about that dealing with JWB, like everybody that I deal with, it's like going to like an In-N-Out burger. Like you can tell that everybody that works here was like class president or captain of the soccer team or whatever, right? Like you don't have a bad experience with the people that come here, and you see it across all of it. There's a bunch of like ex-military and ex like college athletes and all these like just very, very high achieving people that really, really care and have been completely indoctrinated in this like long-term relationship first mentality. So yeah, they win best place to work every single year. They have their pick of the litter of young Jacksonville talent all day long. Just recently we were out here, they serve food every day for, like food's included. And sometimes they bring a food truck. We're out there in this food truck. Kid comes up, he's like, "Oh, hey, Greg Cohen, I wanted to say hi. I heard you on a podcast and I was so moved by the way that you go about business that I decided to apply here. And I started here 2 weeks ago."
That's incredible. Oh, it's so cool.
Yeah. So yeah, they get their pick of the litter of talent.
One of the other things you mentioned was this kind of, I guess the easiest one is just like a financial wherewithal that seems to be maybe, let me give you an outside perspective. You tell me whether this matches with what kind of your experience has been, and then also in the industry. I think real estate and real estate investing gets this rap for being at times a very like, you can either have long-term, you can even be thinking buy and hold, you just kind of set it and forget it kind of thing, or you're thinking about this in a very short-term cash flow, like in and out, you're churning, whether it's flipping, whether it's, it's hard money lenders, it's all this kind of like, you're not thinking about planning for the worst case scenario. And I think you've seen that permeate a little bit in the real estate investing, dialogue where people I don't think many firms of JWB scale have a year of operating expenses set aside. That strikes me as really
I would say
remarkable.
that 90% of companies don't have a year of operating period.
Geez. So can you say anything more about like what you've learned? I want to find a way to tie this into what you've seen that allow JWB to do, but then also what that's taught you about investing in the right way as a real estate investor.
Yeah, man. When like Greg and I first started ideating about the book, right, which we do every like 6th or 7th run, one of the first ideas is like, dude, I think that your book overall is about long-term thinking, right? Like the way that they approach the asset class, which if you are thinking long-term thinking, there is no better like risk-adjusted return on investment, right? Is the same way that they approach their relationships. It's the same way that they approach, right? Like it's the same way they approach every deal. It's the reason why. So, so there are 4 guys. So I want to stick to this long-term thinking thing. So let me go down this path, right? The four partners all have like their superpower, their buckets, right? Like Greg is the customer facing guy. Alex is the community facing guy. Eisman is the CEO. So he's like the team facing guy, and Regal is he's the finance facing guy. Alex, the community facing guy, was literally like in their manager meetings, I think like 10 years ago or 8 years ago. She's like, guys, here's my idea. I'm going to do stuff for people all the time here in Jacksonville, and I want the support of JWB to do it. And I think that in 10 years, when stuff's really starting to happen, is going to put us at the center of every conversation we need to be. Things like that, man.
Yeah.
So and it's all come true, right? Like they have now literally bought like 16 city blocks of downtown Jacksonville that is up from like 3 city blocks like 6 months ago. I don't quote me on all that, right? But like,
sure.
But it's literally like more than 15 city blocks of downtown Jacksonville. And before they were at like 3 last time we took the tour in December. And that's literally allowed them, the fact that they have one guy, Alex, who's like the 10-year visionary, and that's just his role. To be thinking 10 years down the line while the rest of the team is executing on the day-to-day, and they have figured out how to take this like mad genius and have it not spill over into the rest of what they do. They take bets on things, right? Like they 90%, 95% of their effort is their hedgehog of rental property investing. That is like, how do you acquire a property, make it profitable, blah, 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 blah. 10% is like container apartments, build to rent, which is now the thing that like really put them on the map, was like a bet that they took, right? They're out there experimenting with Airbnbs. Do they want to turn their like property management company into an Airbnb thing? But it's just like 10% of it's 10% of what they spent their resources off or less, right? Because they're always just like understanding that, yes, this is really good right now, but in 20 years, real estate is cyclical and things are going to change and we need to continue like diversifying. I don't know. It's just, you just see data points of their long-term thinking across everything that they do.
It strikes me too that long-term thinking probably translates to the point you made about Alex and finding ways to help people into, it translates into community that then feeds the growth of JWB as well.
Yeah.
So if we turn a little bit towards kind of the nuts and bolts of real estate investing, that piece of it, what I would love to start with and to frame a little bit of this part of our conversation would be thinking about, as you've had all these conversations with Greg, both on the show and other, on and off air, what are the things about investing in real estate that you think most people who are not currently investors don't understand? Maybe, it can be a long list or a short list, but where would you start there?
For one, I think on a very basic level, people don't understand the 5 profit centers. So when you say investing in real estate, I would love to just kind of make that target smaller to investing in turnkey rental income properties, right? Or like in rental properties, right? Because I don't know the rest of real estate. Sure. I think the first one is you can do this without being a plumber and a landlord and whatever. And even though there is definitely a population of like fly-by-night companies that do this, that are shysters and or doing their best and they just fucking suck at it. Sure. There is a creme de la creme of this class, right? That operates like a Silicon Valley company, right? Yeah. So I don't think people understand that. Like there is a company with the level of sophistication that these dudes have, like they are Netflix level sophistication, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Operating this, right? So I think that's probably number one. Number two is the 5 profit centers piece. I think when people talk about rental property investing, they're thinking, well, yeah, they generally obsess over one of them. They're like, you can't bet on, because if you live in like Miami or New York, you are thinking, well, I'm going to buy this thing today at $500,000 and it's a piece of shit 1-bedroom apartment, like an hour away from where anybody wants to live. But in 10 years, it's going to be worth $1.5 million, right? Or whatever. And they don't see how the economics of that. So like people are blinded by their immediate market dynamics, right? Okay. And the idea that there is a Netflix that can operate in another city and do it for you, right? So I would say that's number 2 before understanding the things is like your immediate market dynamics don't have to dictate where you
everywhere isn't like your current view.
Correct. Okay. Correct. And it's possible to do it remote without you having to be somebody that has to fly there all the time or whatever, right? Like, or dealing with Joe, the landlord guy who sucks. Third is when you start thinking about, they'll think about like the cash flow of it and they think, yeah, man, so all right, cool. So I get fucking like $200-300 a month profit. And then the moment that I don't have a tenant in there for like 3 months, all that goes away and whatever thing I have to think. So they're just thinking about like the cash flow piece of it. Sure. And on top of that, is it really $300 a month? Because taxes, bro. Right. So that piece of it and how that fits into just like, I talk about it on the show a lot, like quarterback arm strength. I don't know. Are you an NFL fan?
I am. Yeah, I am.
Okay. So like quarterback arm strength to me is like, you got to be able to make every throw at the NFL level. But at a certain point, I don't give a shit that Joe Flacco could take a knee in the 50-yard line and throw it over the upright. Right. Sure. Right. Like it doesn't matter if you can throw it through a wall, you still decision-making and like leadership and whatever plays a lot into it. Right. Tom Brady does not have the strongest arm of any quarterback ever, but you need to have quarterback arm strength. So like positive cash flow is like quarterback arm strength. If you have that, now it unlocks all these other things to think long-term. And within that is the idea that your tenant, as long as you're positive cash flow, you also have somebody paying down a loan and like paying into your equity. JWB handles the tax stuff for you and like makes that very, very easy because there's these like tax benefits that you can get that are also a profit center. There is the appreciation that in Jacksonville happens to be higher than all the other like positive cash flow markets. And that is actually where you make the bulk of your money long-term, on top of the idea that if your house is like appreciating while you're paying down your mortgage, the equity you build in your house is another access to capital that becomes another financial vehicle all by itself.
Sure.
And then there is inflation hedging, which is really that's like a money nerd thing. I don't even want to like get into that, but I understand that, you know, inflation, when it happens, it sucks. We just haven't lived it in a long time, but we're going into it right now.
That's a perfect, there's a couple pieces that I want to pick up on. One might be, and I don't know whether this is a place that you like, so for you as somebody who recently invested in JWB, what were the, maybe you mentioned that there was an education process for you where you kind of got a sense to spend a year or so learning from Greg, understanding how he thinks, understanding what, you know, really drives his strategy and the team strategy. What were the maybe key signals as somebody, and I'm going to frame this thinking about speaking to a listener or an audience, right? Who's never invested in a turnkey, you know, rental property before. What were the maybe, you know, handful of things where you're like, oh, okay, I know this is the right move for me, even though I've never done this before, you know, here's what gave me the green light.
The leverage piece to me was big, right? Like the idea that if you're looking at a real estate market in like a 30-year time frame, that appreciation is going to be like, you can count on that appreciation the same way that you'd be like, yeah, man, the market, if you look at it in 30-year markets, it's going to be like 8-9%, right? Like everybody assumes that that's law. So if we can assume that the 30-year market in real estate is also law at like, you can normalize it to this in a local level. And then you can take the idea that if you're going to get 4.6% appreciation, the same way that you're expecting 9% appreciation in the stock market too, because that's also just an appreciation play, even though it's more liquid, and you're only putting 20% of your money down, you're literally baking in 16%. You're baking in 16%, which is already higher than whatever other assumption you're going to make in a very, in like a long-term thought, risk-adjusted asset of whatever the fuck. Like that piece of it, I was like, that made my eyes huge.
That clicked. Wow. Okay.
Right. So that 16% by itself, that doesn't account for the actual investment inside the property, which is also another like 6 to 8% to 9%. And then when I jumped in, it was also the idea that like there was this window of time where the interest rates were like super, super low, which supercharged this whole thing. And it just really moved me to action in that regard as well.
You have this note in terms of one of the problems you can help, you know, listeners solve, being how to build a network for an individual. And I wonder if we could tie that in, maybe it ties in, maybe it doesn't, but it seems like, how would you recommend that somebody go about building a network in real estate if they're interested in getting started as a investor, whether it's specifically in, say, turnkey rental properties or just more broadly? What do you think that process should look like for somebody?
Figure out a way that you can add value to the people around you, right? Like the way that anybody builds a network, right?
Yeah.
I just happen to think that right now, the easiest way to add value to people is by promoting them, because people don't do a really good job of promoting themselves. So like starting a podcast, starting a YouTube channel, telling yourself that every time that you're going to talk to somebody, you're also going to write an email to your email list about the person that you met, right? Like building some form of stage that you can leverage, to me, is the best way to build a network, right? Like I learned that through the young professional groups, and now it's evolved to like, dude, everybody can have a podcast, and just saying that you have one gets you a meeting with 90% of people that you wouldn't get a meeting with.
And you mentioned before too that you had this kind of moment where you recognized, hey, if I make this about the other person, right? If I make this about how do I promote you versus talk about myself, I'm going to open doors. I'm going to, you know, it's going to be selfish in the long term because it's going to help get me where I want to go. Was there a moment or like a poignant story that kind of crystallized that experience for you?
Yeah, man. I'm like 31 years old. I'm now on the board of like Habitat for Humanity and like a couple of other charities. And now I'm going to lunch with other board members that are like president of local bank and, you know, like CEOs of companies and local politicians. And for the first time, I found myself in a room of people that I couldn't just bro out about chicks and sports with.
Hmm.
you know? So like being funny guy Ace Ventura, like guy, all of a sudden I looked at like what I was known for, which is like how funny and entertaining I can be. And I
Yeah.
realized that there was a diminishing return to it for the first time in my life.
Hmm.
And then as I'm sitting in this lunch, literally I'm having an out of body experience, watching my buddy Oscar Lopez, who's a commercial banker, sit there and talk to the same person that I was like, how do I talk to this dude when I can't talk about the next bachelor party I'm going to? He's saying, so how's your business, man? Like, what are you right now most like trying to solve for? Right. Like, cause that's what they teach you as a commercial banker.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing them get into interesting conversations. And then fast forward to like a couple months later for a different charity, we're putting together this event. And this other guy, Otto Forrester, and me are in the room with this lady, Virginia Jocko, who's the executive director of the charity. And Virginia's like, all right, so for this event, I think I want to reach out to this person. And Otto's like, oh, that person's in this business. You know what the key to that business is? It's blah, 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 blah. And then she's like, well, I'm also going to do this. And he's like, well, that person's in this business. You know the key to that business? And Virginia's like, Otto, you're a really interesting guy. And I'm like, fuck, I want to be that. Right. And that's what it kind of just came together of. If you are more and more curious about people and you're trying to like deconstruct what works for them, what struggles for them, what their struggles, what isn't working for them, what they're trying, what they care about, the more that compounds into your like knowledge base, the more valuable you become to the people around you. And on the front end, you're also like, people actually want to talk to you and you're able to then turn around and introduce them and whatever.
So I think there's two pieces here. One being, I think there's going to be an opportunity for us to give you a stage to borrow that, term, to be able to speak on the community piece specifically, because I think you're going to be able to bring some really powerful insights related to what does it look like to build the community, and what is it, I mean, and just to be frank too, Pablo, I think there's a way to unpack bring value conversation. To me, sometimes that feels a little abstract, and I think you've got stories that relate to, oh, what does that mean? Because I think it's easy to say I want to be of value, but that might mean do these things tactically.
Totally, dude. I have a ton of speaking points on networking, right? Like I have like a whole YouTube series on like networking tactics and breaking that stuff down, and I do think that I break that down better than most people.
Yeah, that's perfect, because I think one of the things we talked about with Greg originally for the tour was we kind of thought through, okay, there's real estate investing, passive real estate investing shows that are going to be perfect in terms of the audience JWB wants to get in front of, because these are listeners who've already raised their hand and said, hey, I'm interested, if it's already a passive vehicle, but I've got an incredible organization behind it like JWB, man, this is just about building trust, and that's a perfect bullseye. But then we've got these expanding concentric circles where there's going to be a group of people that might be really interested in the community building insights that you can bring, that would also be capable of making passive investments with JWB. So I think I would ask one maybe more community question, and that would be, is there anything around the community building conversation, whether it's the conversations you've had, whether what you see in terms of the influencers you pay attention to, that you wish was talked about more?
Yeah, the idea that community building and networking is an investment vehicle on itself that to me goes one-to-one with diversification and upside, right? Like,
say more.
Yeah, like as I was sitting there kind of like in a dead-end job before all this stuff clicked to me, making good money, thinking that I was going to get laid off at the moment that somebody thought about it, I had the decision of staying at work and trying to like work my way through this and trying to impress the boss that I didn't really feel like I cared about whether I impressed him or not. And that was the advice I was getting from the people closest to me. Or I could spend my time out in the community executing these like altruistic projects that felt good, but I was also out there impressing a bunch of other people that I knew could lead to something else. Right. So that to me is like number one. Like I made the tactical choice of just like, yeah, sure. I was working at a hospital developer, and like, I don't know anything about construction still to this day. And like, I just made this tactical choice that I rather know about people than about the field that I was in, because I was always going to have options if this company that I was working for, decided that they didn't have a role for me. I could get other options by having people that would vouch for who I am and what I do and what I can bring to the table. That's one. Two, if you read Nassim Taleb's book called Black Swan,
sure.
He talks about, so so his is a whole investment philosophy around investing like 80, 85% of your portfolio in very like low risk, like look for the low risk stuff with as good a return as you can find, and then invest 10 to 15% on things that expose you to positive black swans, right? Like biotech, technology, healthcare, stuff like that. Things that something happens in the world and all of a sudden you have this like huge upside, or you hit on Peloton, or whatever. And he talks about how like cost of living in New York is super, super high, but baked into it is positive exposure with black swan. Because if you're in this like super, super dense city where you're going to have to share cabs with people and and apartment lobbies and public transportation, blah, 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 with a bunch of really high income, high working people, your interactions with everybody could be this like giant upside thing. Like Greg, me meeting Greg was a major positive black swan in my life. And that just wouldn't have come any other way, so I see it as like exposure to upside with risk mitigation of diversification as an investment vehicle.
There's a really, that's really powerful, Pablo, because it seems to me that it cuts through both the kind of, there's what's the word I'm looking for here? I think everybody in a business context understands the value of networking at this kind of, again, like abstract level and building community. Like, yeah, that's great. But when you put it in those terms as an investment vehicle, as a way to diversify, as a way to expose yourself to positive black swans, you're cutting across a lot of different, lines of thought, for lack of a better term, where I think you can, that's perfect. Thanks. And I think it's really energizing.
And that's, thank you, man. I appreciate that. And that's for networking. For community specific, I see it as low churn, high LTV. Right. Like my aha moment of community was at my brother's funeral. 1,200 people show up to it. We're in this like Catholic church. And ever since I was a teenager, I've had my ins and outs with the Catholic Church. And I look around and I'm like, these people, this isn't my church, this is my community. And these 1,200 people have made the last 2 years way easier and are making this moment way better, as bad as it is and as bad as all it is. And I can never leave this. And immediately, maybe not in that moment, but like my next leap was just like, okay, so community is a business model. Like the Catholic Church retains me as a client because I can't leave my community because it's so valuable. And if adding value to people is the way that you do this, I could never imagine anything that could add me value in this moment like this, right? And then I'm like, oh shit. If I get a Harley Davidson and I start riding a Harley Davidson, I can't switch brands motorcycles because I'll lose all my friends 2 years later. So other businesses have figured this out, right? So like that to me is kind of like that was like the aha moment of community, of just like LTV and churn. Now I also see it as a feedback mechanism and all these other things that then open up your, it opens up your product roadmap and how you can serve people better and how you can like, optimize your business based on actually interacting with the people that you're really trying to serve.
That's another example, Pablo, where the dot that you've connected there strikes me as one that can resonate with somebody who might not be thinking of building community in that quantifiable of a way, right? And I'm sure part of that is for you in learning how, okay, like how do I want to communicate this value proposition to potential clients, to the world? But man, it's really powerful because it's not, I would guess that is not the way most people in the B2B marketing space, for kind of a broad generic term, think about and articulate the value of community, right? It still gets tied down to this lead generation piece and all those things that happen, but it's not in this, okay, it's churn, it's LTV, it's thinking about, going back to networking, diversification, positive, exposure. That's really cool. Okay, so let me circle back to JWB real quickly and ask you, what would be anything about JWB that we haven't touched on yet that you would really want an opportunity to talk about on a podcast? Something that you think is just, you've captured a couple of the lightning in a bottle things that I think we'll be able to pull together, but I'm wondering if anything else comes to mind.
I don't know if about JWB as much as how fucking awesome I think Jacksonville is.
Yeah, say more about that. That's great. We haven't touched on Jacksonville yet. Yeah.
Say more listen, man, I was in Miami. I moved back to Miami 2009, and I was a big part of the economic development scene down there. And I'm a green building guy, and like my wife's an urban designer. The idea that a city has a waterfront downtown that is like not even close to being fully activated is something that I lived in Miami, right?
Yeah.
And then I saw as it got activated what it's done for Miami. And I was there while it was happening, and I realized that a big lift comes from this generation of transient people that show up, that mix with the people that are from there that aren't over it already, and
Sure.
magic happens, right? And what I'm living right now in Jacksonville is exactly that, right? Like I see the pattern recognition on top of the fact that I moved here thinking that my quality of life would go up some, my cost of life would go down some, but I'd probably get a haircut in like the level of network that I could build here and the
Sure.
economic opportunity here. And I've been way off. Like the quality of life is way higher than I thought it would be. The cost of living is like really, really low. It's 60%. Like my monthly nut is 60% what I was paying in Miami.
Wow.
Still, and now Miami's gone way up, right? But like,
Sure.
and on top of that, network that I've built here is as good or better than anything I built in Miami or LA when I was down there. And economic opportunity as an entrepreneur, whatever, I kill what I eat, it's on me. But my wife, who's a W-2 employee, makes right now, 4 years later, living in Jacksonville, makes twice as much as what she was making in Miami.
Wow.
Right. So like economic opportunities here, the quality of life is here. Another thing that I like to talk about is this idea that surf and quality of life are intrinsically kind of like understood and sold. Like if you watch a fucking Prudential commercial, it's some like 65-year-old guy about to go paddle out. It's like what people are trying to sell, right? That happens here all the time, right? Like this area reminds me of when I lived in Orange County, California. The way that they talked about Orange County 20 years ago is exactly how I picture Jacksonville right now. Like I think this is Orange County, California 40 years ago, because it's got this like surf culture and this like attachment to open spaces within the city fabric. It's got really cool road trips. It's close to other metro areas that influence it. And it's got a blue collar class of citizen that a bunch of them are going to get rich off of real estate in one generation. And it's going to be like Huntington Beach, California, where that's happening, right? So to put a button on all of that, like my tie into surf, like I moved here, one of the reasons was because I wanted to surf more.
Nice.
And
okay, that's great.
Literally like 3 months after I moved here, Surfline, which is like the website that you go to like to get the surf forecast or whatever, puts out an article that's like major cities across the world with surf. And the context was you have to have more than a million citizens, residents, and more than like 150 days a year of like consistent surf. And the list was LA, San Diego, Honolulu, Sydney, Rio de Janeiro, Cape Town, South Africa, Tel Aviv, and Jacksonville.
Oh, wow.
Like, what the fuck? You know, like what other, world-class city list is there that any other city that is this, like this easy entry barrier to like live in right now comes anywhere close?
So that's really exciting. And I think, no, but it's fantastic because we can also build in there that picture, right? Painting that picture of, hey, what if Jacksonville is Orange County 40 years ago? Like what would you have been able to do if you could have been part of that community as it was coming up? Honestly, the thought that came to mind too for me, Pablo, was, well, I guess too, do you have a hard stop at the hour? Because I can absolutely wrap if you have a hard stop, no problem at all. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I do. Not a hard stop, but like I can't really go more than like 5 minutes over.
Perfect. The last thing, and you can even think on this, I was just going to ask you, surfing. What has surfing meant to you in your life, business related? What's like your relationship been with it?
It is what taught me that I'm not in control, and that you gotta kind of like, it's been two things. Number one, it's been the longest losing battle that I have ever fought and stayed in, right? Like I've sucked shit at surfing for 15 years. And I'm just now starting to feel like I know how to surf 15 years later. And then on top of that, it's really has been just like, I was like a really hard charging A-type personality that can still come out. But the idea that like, when you're in that moment, like you're nothing, man. Like you got to be able to adapt to the ever-changing environment, and you got to be completely focused. And, like nothing else really matters. That idea of, in some of the most powerful moments, you just got to be able to like go with it and not try to control, but to make the best of it, has also been something that has really mellowed me out and given me much more perspective and made me less of a dick.
That's really, I think that's going to be a compelling thread that we can pull on, because I think in most business conversations, having something to connect to that's beyond business, that's informed life, business, sport, that's huge. So anything you want to add, Pablo, before we wrap, just general points?
No, I wouldn't say adding, man, but I would honestly love this recording to release it as a podcast.
Oh, 100%.
And I'll be like, this is Lemonpie. Like I'll promote Lemonpie, I'll promote JWB,
That'd be great.
I'll promote my shit. This was awesome. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. Yeah, that'd be amazing, Papa. We'd love to. Cool. Okay. So then from here, let me give you a quick rundown of kind of what the next steps look like. So we're now into the beginning of this 4-week onboarding process. And the major deliverables you'll see from us is we're going to craft a professional bio and set of hooks that we'll be using with podcasters and send that to you for approval. We don't send any of that information out without making sure it kind of both that you have approval of it and that it matches the positioning you want, the topics feel consistent. Greg will have a chance to look at that too. So we're totally aligned there. And then a target list of shows we want to go after for you. My gut tells me we're going to have a list of probably 20 to 30 shows we want to target, and that the bulk of them will be real estate focused. But I also have a feeling that we can do some really great work for JWB by putting you in front of some of those, again, concentric circle, maybe outside of the hardcore investing piece, in terms of getting in front of potential investors and clients for JWB. But that's kind of the next 2 major deliverables over the coming 4 weeks here.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, this has been incredible, Pablo. This is a lot of fun. I'm stoked to hear that it was likewise for you too. And if any questions come up, I'll send a recap over here in the next couple of days, but I'm here in the meantime if you need anything.
What were you doing before this, Josh?
I actually, ironically enough, I was hosting a podcast and running an organization in mental and emotional sport performance. So I've been an athlete my whole life, martial arts, football. And so got into the mental, the emotional side of training as part of the martial arts kind of overlap, and had a chance to work with this organization that, comprised professional coaches, professional athletes, some really cool people. And part of that was doing a podcast, which is what got me just hooked on the medium and what, has allowed me to fall in love with it.
That's awesome, man. Is this second job out of college, third job out of college?
No, I appreciate. Thank you, Pablo. I can't hide my stubble here. I'm trying to look a little older. No, this is, probably 4th or 5th. So I owned a martial arts studio with my wife for a while. I've been in and out of running small businesses and Kempo, karate. So I've done that for 15, 20 years. Worked in a couple startups, venture capital right out of school, and then jumped into a couple different tech companies. So I've been all over the place, but I think I found a nice home at the moment,
Yeah, badass, man. Badass. Like I just, I ask for A, I want to get to know you, and B, totally. I think your skill set of being able to see what's interesting about somebody and pull it out is a soft skill that I think is very, very underrated. And I wonder how you find guys like that.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you. Yeah, this honestly is one of the most fun parts of what I do is doing these kickoff calls, because I love hosting these kind of conversations, and I just think people are freaking fascinating. So it's pretty fun for me to get a chance to hear how people tick and what has led them to success and learnings and all that good stuff.
That's awesome. What else do you do?
Right now, it's primarily Lemonpie. My wife and I actually.
What else do you do within Lemonpie?
So, my role is the head of talent relations, and what that typically encompasses is more of kind of it's setting strategy with our team for the clients that we work with. And then also just, helping lead the team and kind of interface with Eric and make sure we're on point as a company and as a team.
Okay, cool, man. And then what were you saying about other stuff that you do and your wife?
No, I was just going to say my wife is a huge real estate. That she's the quintessential, who's the character in Charlie Brown, who's like, what I want for my birthday, real estate. So we're just starting right now to work on building our investment portfolio and doing some fun stuff there. So this has been a fun process working with Greg and JWB, because we love this stuff and my wife dorks out on it.
That's cool, man. That's awesome.
Cool.
Are you super tall, or is this a funny angle of the camera?
Well, I'm standing. I'm not super tall. I wish I could say I was, but I'm only, 5'10" and a half, 5'10" and 3/4 on a good day.
All right. So taller than average, but not super tall. I'm the same exact height. I'm the same exact height.
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right.
It was always a challenge because I can never dunk, and I wanted to so badly, man. Yeah. Cool. Well,
you're talking to somebody that has 0 fast twitch muscle fiber in my body. So I'm a frustrated, I'm super competitive. I'm incredibly eye-hand coordinated. I'm super heady, but I can't run fast. I can't jump high. I can't take a hit. So whatever, bro.
You're not going to hold it against me that I can't dunk. This makes me feel better. Okay. Yeah. Well, Pablo, this was incredible. I will send you the recording as soon as we have it, and then I'll send a recap over with next steps and all that good stuff.
Love it, dude. Awesome. I appreciate this experience, man. This was cool.
Awesome. It's great to hear. Thanks, Pablo. Take care.